Hey kids, it is Friday. Woohoo! Anyhow, I don't want to be too over dramatic or anything like that, but you are about to watch probably the most important presentation of this 9 weeks of life science, our life science unit. This discusses most of the names of the organelles. You'll get into more organelles as you get into like high school biology and stuff like that. But for the middle school, these are the organelles that you need to know. So pay special attention as I go through them. You might want to look at the questions and see some of the definitions or what you need to look for. But here we go. All right. Okay. First of all, when we start talking today, we've done talking about eukaryotes and prokaryotes. We're kind of putting prokaryotes off to the side, not that we still won't talk about them, but our focus now is only on the eukaryotes, eukaryotic organisms, okay? And then there's like we have, of all cells, we have prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Now under eukaryotes, we have two more categories, plant cells and animal cells. All right? This is a great point. Even though they are microscopic, so you have to have a microscope to see them, they are very, very complex. They're like big, huge organisms in themselves in just a little cell. All right. So as it says, they have many membrane bound. So they have all these organelles have a membrane around them that function or they work to keep the cell alive. Now, if like in us, in a human being, if one cell dies, do we die? No, of course not. Okay, you're losing skin cells all the time. Okay, but you need to keep your cells healthy. All right. As we've been talking in our IXL, which was a great introduction to this, cells get their energy by breaking down food using something called cellular respiration. And again, that's what your IXL has been about. Okay? And the organelle that does that is called the mitochondrion. Mitochondrion. Okay? And oxygen is used to release. So the oxygen comes into your body, into your cells, because the plants produce it in the environment, okay, through photosynthesis. And then your cells, your mitochondrion in your cells use it, okay? They have their own DNA, which is weird, okay? So the little mitochondrion have their own DNA. And then there are two membranes. There's a smooth one around the outside, and then an inside one that's is folded or curvy. Okay, so you can kind of see that there. All right, their name is the powerhouse of the cell. And that is because they process sugars through cellular respiration, and the sugar and the oxygen, again, as we've talked about in IXL, supply energy for the cell to use. Okay, here is a great picture. We're going to be doing more with looking at cells, drawing cells, coloring cells, all of those things next week. But here is a mitochondrion, okay? I don't know why. I've always thought they look like little baby crocs, but that's just me. Not crocodiles, Crocs, the shoes. Okay. All right. So now we talk about proteins. Remember, we get those from eating like steak, fish, milk, eggs, nuts, all those type things. Well, they control a lot of things in the cell as well as providing structural support for the cell and then tissues, which again, we'll talk about next week. So getting these proteins or making these proteins once you've eaten the food, packaging them up almost like Amazon or the post office, and then moving them around requires different organelles. Okay, the first main one is what's called the ribosome. And it makes proteins by putting all those amino acids that we talked about in last lesson, putting those together, and then that helps the DNA. So it works to do all of that. Okay, they're not in a membrane, and in prokaryotes, they just float around, okay? But they're the only ones in the eukaryotes without a membrane. So real quickly again, how do they make proteins? Well, they take those amino acids and almost make it like, those little paper chains you make for Christmas trees. That's what they do. All right, and there they are again. Those are those just little dots because they don't have a membrane around them. Okay, then a fun little term, endoplasmic reticulum. We will probably call it ER, okay? So they're always near the nucleus, and they help or assist in making, which is production, processing, so figuring out what to do with it, and the transport or moving of those proteins, okay, that were just made before, okay? And then they also help when your nutrients come in from your food, then they produce the lipids in the cells, okay? You'll hear two terms with ER, smooth and rough. All right. Well, there's the rough because the ribosomes attach themselves and then they make it bumpy. Okay. So the rough ER has ribosomes attached to its membrane, which makes the proteins. And then the smooth is the part that makes the lipids and breaks down toxic. We'll see that word quite a bit. Toxic means bad, not good for you. Things that could damage the cell. All right. So here's another question. How does the rough ER differ, or how is it different than the smooth ER? Well, the rough ER has these ribosomes on its surface that make the proteins. Smooth doesn't have the ribosomes, and it makes the lipids. All right, then another funny word, Golgi complex. So this also helps to package and then send out different things, specifically protein, and it's called Golgi, from the scientist who discovered it, complex. Okay? It has a bunch of flattened membranes that are enclosed. Okay? So it looks like that. I always thought it kind of looked like the Nickelodeon logo. The membrane pinches off to form a small bubble, or these little vesicle things, and then that will either take it to other parts of the cell or remove itself out through the cell membrane. There it is, right there. Down here as well. Okay, so what is the job or the function of the Golgi complex? Well, it modifies or changes and then transports the lipids and proteins that the ER had made to do different jobs. So this would be like the big Amazon, if you order something from Amazon and then they ship it to like UPS or FedEx and then it's delivered out, that's kind of what we're dealing with here. Okay, now the plant cell is a little bit different, and we'll talk later about why it needs extra things, but the plant cell has some extra parts, okay, in order to survive. Okay, and those are called cell wall. They have what's called a large central vacuole and then chloroplast. Okay, so all cells have a cell membrane, but then outside of that for a plant cell is what's called a cell wall. And think about why they would need that. Well, plants are generally out in the weather, they need more protection. Okay? And as it says, they don't have a skeleton, so they get their shape from the cell wall. All those little green lines are cell walls. Okay, now there's another thing called a vacuole. Now, don't get confused. Animal cells also have vacuoles, but in the plant cell, it's much larger, okay? And it has fluid in it. So think about in a plant, they're going to need extra water for photosynthesis. They need extra support, okay? So there's different things in there. Enzymes, which is a word we need to talk about, and we haven't yet. Nutrients that you've gotten from whatever is in your diet. There's our water, and then waste too. Okay? So again, the plant cells have a large central vacuole. This whole blue area is the vacuole that stores water, which helps support the cell. They need the water. Okay, so here's a question, which is what we're just talking about. How do large central vacuoles differ from animal cell vacuoles? Okay, they all contain enzymes, nutrients, water, and waste, but in a large central vacuole only contains water, again, to help support the cell and with photosynthesis. Okay. All right. We're going to do more of this next week for sure. But real quickly, we'll go through these parts. There's letter A. It looks like our little crocs. That is our mitochondrion. Letter B here is pointing to the inside line, I think, which should be cell membrane. Yep. C is pointing to the outside. Say it to yourself. Cell wall. D is pointing to the Nickelodeon purpley thing. That is your Golgi complex. E is pointing to these filaments, which was from yesterday's presentation. That is a cytoskeleton. F is all of this stuff around the nucleus, so that will be the endoplasmic reticulum. G is this big part, kind of like in a peach or anything, a plum, anything like that, the big seeds in the middle. Well, that's where the nucleus is. And then around it as the ribosomes, those little dots. Okay. Obviously, plants make their own food during photosynthesis. We'll spend a lot of time on that in about 2 or 3 weeks. Okay. But plants have something called chloroplast, and that is where the photosynthesis happens. Okay. So, that again, we're going to talk about this a lot, several days, but that's when sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water make sugar and oxygen. Okay. And they are green. This is really important because they have something in them called chlorophyll. So chlorophyll is in the chloroplast. And again, it's a green pigment. All right. So we're going to again talk about that later. Okay. We'll watch that later as well. So what does the chlorophyll do inside the chloroplast? Great question. It's a green pigment. It is what absorbs the sunlight, which we have to have for photosynthesis to take place. All right. Just in the animal cells, they have, we're getting there somewhere, the lysosome. Okay. And it has what's called digestive enzymes, which enzymes make things happen more quickly. It speeds it up. Okay. So those break down bad organelles, waste materials, foreign invaders, like if you get a cold or the flu, hopefully not COVID, but those lysosomes help break those apart. All right. We're going to skip that one. We'll come back to it later. Okay. We're going to go through all these next week. I've talked long enough. It's a Friday, but we'll go through all the cells and their functions again and again and again. You'll get to the point where you know them so well, you'll be tired of it. All right. Well, have a great day. Let me get this off. And hopefully you heard lots of new terms today. Maybe.